The giant cowboy froze with Evelyn Price's warm pie in his hands when he saw the tiny cottonwood branch stitched into the cloth. The same mark that had appeared on letters he kept hidden for more than a year. Wind scraped sagebrush across the yard as Evelyn stood at his gate, wondering why the quiet stranger looked at her as though he already knew her. Folks in Cottonwood Crossing had warned her about Big Jacob Whitmore, but she had come anyway. Then a nervous mare jerked beside the barn. Jacob could have forced the animal still. Instead, the towering cowboy loosened the rope, stepped aside, and waited for her to trust him. Evelyn's breath caught. She had read that exact way of handling the frightened horse before, in a letter, signed only J.W. She tightened her hands around the pie cloth and walked toward the man who seemed to be hiding a piece of her own past. Stay with Evelyn for the walk across that yard, and tell me, would you knock on his door? By the time the sun cleared the eastern rim of the valley, Evelyn Price had already weighed 3 sacks of oats, checked the south pasture, and written 2 figures into the worn ledger beside her stove. October 1888 had come cold to Cottonwood Crossing. Frost silvered the fence rails before dawn, and the Bighorn Mountains stood blue-gray beyond the sagebrush. Nearly 3 years had passed since Daniel was buried on the hill behind the house. Evelyn had learned to measure time differently since then. Hay left in the loft. Dollars owed, cattle fit for winter, money saved toward the freight and remount stop she still meant to build. That afternoon, she carried an apple cinnamon pie across Willow Fork. Martha Bell had mentioned the new owner of the abandoned ranch while wrapping coffee at the general store. Name's Jacob Whitmore, big fellow, doesn't say much. Evelyn had heard plenty of descriptions like that. A quiet man could become an outlaw by the time gossip traveled from the livery to the saloon. So she baked the pie. Not because she needed company, because grief had already taken enough from her. She would not let it take ordinary kindness, too. Whitmore Ranch looked better than it had a month earlier. New cedar posts stood along the corral. Fresh shingles covered one side of the barn. Then a hammer struck somewhere inside. A chestnut mare jerked against her lead. The man beside her could have overpowered the animal easily. He was unusually tall, perhaps 6'7", with shoulders shaped by years of ranch work. But he didn't pull. He loosened the rope, turned slightly aside, waited. The mare's breathing slowed. At last she stretched her neck and touched his open palm. Evelyn stopped at the gate. She had read that before. A frightened horse doesn't need a stronger hand. It needs one that won't punish fear. The sentence had arrived months ago in a letter signed only J.W. The man looked up. "You Mrs. Price?" His voice was lower than she expected. "Evelyn will do." She lifted the covered dish. "I brought something for the new neighbor." When he took it, his rough fingers stopped at the edge of the cloth. Evelyn had embroidered a small cottonwood branch there years ago. Jacob stared at it for half a second too long. Then he looked at her. "Much obliged." Inside, the cabin smelled of coffee, pine boards, and saddle leather. Jacob poured from a blackened pot and gave Evelyn the less chipped cup. He uncovered the pie. "Apple and cinnamon, unless I forgot the apples." The corner of his mouth moved. "My mother used to make one like this for the first snow." Evelyn's cup stopped halfway to her lips. J.W. had written about that too. She looked around the sparse cabin. 1 bed, 2 chairs, tools stacked square against the wall. Nothing that suggested a man expected to remain long. "A roof doesn't make a place a home," she said quietly. Jacob was cutting the pie. "It becomes home when somebody expects you back." The knife stopped against the plate. Evelyn set down her coffee. She knew those words. She had read them so often that the fold in that particular letter had nearly worn through. Neither spoke. Outside, Willow Fork moved faintly over stone. "J.W.?" Jacob slowly raised his eyes. For all his size, he suddenly seemed like a man with nowhere to hide. Evelyn Price. She let out one small breath. The stranger was gone. In his place stood the man who had known about her sleepless winters, Daniel's empty chair, and the freight station she was still afraid to call a dream. Jacob told her he had passed through Cottonwood Crossing years before. He had once repaired a storm-broken fence for a woman whose name he never learned. Evelyn remembered him then, younger, dust-covered, gone before supper. "I wrote things to you I don't say here," she said. Jacob looked into his coffee. "About Daniel." At her husband's name, something changed. Not much. His thumb simply stopped against the cup. Evelyn noticed, but Jacob said nothing. She left before dark. At the boundary fence, she found every broken post repaired. The wire followed the old line exactly. Jacob could easily have taken several feet of good grazing land. He hadn't. The next morning, Calvin Boone was standing beside the counter at Martha Bell's store when Evelyn came for lamp oil. "Been over to meet Big Jacob?" Evelyn placed her coins on the counter. "He's my neighbor." Boone gave a thin smile. "Used to work cattle. Got himself thrown off an outfit for beating a foreman." Martha stopped wrapping a parcel. Evelyn did not. Boone leaned one elbow against the counter. "Men like Whitmore don't settle without a reason, especially beside a widow sitting on useful land." Evelyn picked up the lamp oil. Outside, wind rolled dust along the wagon road. Across Willow Fork, barely visible beneath the mountains, smoke rose from Jacob Whitmore's chimney. The man in the letters had finally acquired a face. Now Evelyn found herself wondering why that face had appeared on the ranch beside hers. She did not ask him, not yet. For the next several days, she watched. Cottonwood Crossing made that easy. A town with one general store, one livery, a blacksmith shop, and a wagon road running through its middle had few places for a man to disappear. Jacob Whitmore did not seem to be trying. One morning, Evelyn saw him at the livery when a ranch hand came through the doorway carrying a saddle. Jacob stepped aside before the man had to assess. Another afternoon, a freight wagon broke an axle near Martha Bell's store. Jacob put one shoulder beneath the wagon bed while two men slid blocks underneath. When they thanked him, he was already walking away. Then came the incident outside the saloon. A drunken ranch hand knocked Jacob's hat into the dirt. "Let's see if the giant gets angry." Jacob looked at the hat, then at the man. For one uneasy second, the street went quiet. Jacob bent, picked up his hat, brushed the dust from the brim, and walked toward the livery. Evelyn watched from across the road. The letters had never mentioned how much effort it took him to remain gentle. A week after the pie, Willow Fork began to fail. Evelyn noticed it first in the cattle trough. By noon, 6 cows stood around muddy water where there should have been several inches. She walked the creek bank with a measuring stick, then checked Daniel's old figures in the ledger. The numbers did not agree. By evening, Jacob rode over. "Creek's low. I noticed. I found why." They followed Willow Fork north until the ground rose toward Whitmore Ranch. An old diversion ditch cut away from the creek through weeds and broken stones. Water moved steadily through it. Jacob picked up a shovel. "I'll close it." Evelyn put her boot on the blade. He stopped. "Don't. It's taking your water. And if that ditch is covered by an old agreement, Boone can say we interfered with established use." Jacob looked from her boot to her face. Then he released the shovel. "What do you need?" The question caught her more than an argument would have. Daniel kept records. That night she found 3 entries in his ledger mentioning shared water between Price, Whitmore, and downstream grazing land now controlled by Calvin Boone. After that, the search became theirs. Evelyn worked through deeds, freight receipts, and survey notes at the county office. Jacob rode Willow Fork looking for old stone markers hidden under sagebrush. They met in the evenings at her kitchen table. One night, Jacob noticed the upper hinge on her pantry door sagging. Mind if I fix that? Evelyn looked at him. Most men would already have reached for the screwdriver. Go ahead. He repaired it while she checked a freight receipt from 1882. Later, she poured coffee and set a second cup beside his elbow without asking whether he intended to stay. He noticed that too. Neither mentioned it. I never stayed anywhere more than 2 seasons, Jacob said one evening. Evelyn kept her eyes on the survey map. Why? He rubbed a thumb along the edge of the table. Once a place starts feeling like home, I usually find a reason to leave. She finally looked up. That's a strange habit. Been useful. Has it? Jacob had no answer. Evelyn lowered her eyes again. Since Daniel died, I make plans for next week, sometimes next month. But not next year. No. Their hands nearly touched over the map. Jacob drew his back. Evelyn watched him do it. Then she placed one finger beside his on the creek line. Show me where you found the marker. He did. 2 days later, Henry Walsh called Evelyn into the back room of the county recorder's office. Dust floated in the window light. Ledgers filled the shelves from floor to ceiling. I found something from Boone's old cattle outfit, Henry said. He set a freight register on the desk. Evelyn turned the brittle pages. Dates, herd counts, supply charges, names of hired men. Then she reached the week Daniel died. Her finger stopped. Jacob Whitmore, trail foreman, Boone Cattle Company. Evelyn read the date twice, then a third time. The room seemed suddenly too quiet. Jacob had not merely passed through Cottonwood Crossing years ago. He had been working for Calvin Boone on the exact day Daniel's wagon went over North Ridge. Evelyn closed the register. She rode hard enough that the cold air stung her eyes. Jacob was outside his barn when she reached Whitmore Ranch, repairing a leather trace. He saw her dismount and slowly put the awl down. Evelyn did not bother tying her horse. Did you know my husband? Jacob stood. He could have denied it. Asked what she meant. Bought himself another minute. He did none of those things. His face went still. Yes. Evelyn did not move. The wind pushed dry grass against the corral fence. Somewhere inside the barn, a horse stamped once, then settled. Jacob took off his gloves. He did it slowly, as if whatever came next required bare hands. I worked for Boone 3 years ago, he said. Trail foreman. Evelyn said nothing. Jacob looked past her toward North Ridge. Rain had torn up part of the freight road. We all knew it. Boone wanted the herd moved anyway. You argued with him? With his foreman? The one you hit? Jacob nodded. He was forcing the lead cattle into the cut. I tried to stop him. Evelyn's jaw tightened. And Daniel? Jacob swallowed once. His wagon came around the bend below us. The words came plain after that. No excuses, no softening. The herd bunched when the trail narrowed. One animal slipped, another turned. The front rank panicked and pushed sideways toward the wagon road. Jacob grabbed the lead rope from Boone's foreman. The man fought him. Jacob struck him once. By the time the cattle broke, Daniel had already tried to turn his team away from them. The wagon wheel caught the edge. Then it was gone. Evelyn's hand closed around the saddle horn beside her. Jacob saw it. He did not step closer. I went down after him. For the first time, his voice nearly failed. Evelyn looked at him. He was alive? For a little while. The yard seemed to narrow around them. What did he say? Jacob went into the cabin. When he came back, he carried a dark leather pouch, cracked white along the folds. Evelyn recognized Daniel's stitching. She did not reach for it. Jacob held it between both hands. He gave me this. Said there was a copy of an old water agreement inside. Notes, too, about Boone changing the diversion ditch. Evelyn stared at the pouch. He told me to bring it to you. Her eyes lifted. But you didn't. No. That single word landed harder than anything before it. Jacob set the pouch on a fence post between them instead of forcing it into her hands. Boone blamed me for what happened. 2 of his men said I started the trouble, said I hit the foreman and spooked the herd. And you ran. Yes. Why? Because I thought if I came near you, Boone would use me to come after you too. Evelyn gave a short breath that was not a laugh. You decided that for me? Jacob lowered his eyes. Yes. The honesty made it worse. He told her about coming back years later, looking for land, about repairing a storm-broken fence for a woman he did not recognize as Daniel Price's widow. Then Martha Bell had carried the first letter. Months passed, small details collected. A hill behind the house, a husband named Daniel, a freight station that had once been his wife's dream. By then Jacob knew, and still he kept writing. Evelyn finally picked up the pouch. The leather felt cold. You read every letter I sent. Jacob said nothing. I told you things I never told anyone in this town. I know. You let me talk about him. I know. And every time you wrote back, you knew you were the last man who heard his voice. Jacob's shoulders seemed to lose some of their size. I should have told you. When? The moment I knew. But you didn't. No. Evelyn looked at him for a long time. Not at Big Jacob. Not at the man people crossed the street to avoid. At the man who had written carefully measured words by lamplight and hidden the one truth that mattered most. Why didn't you stop writing? Jacob looked down at his hands. Hands that could brace a wagon axle. Hands that could restrain a frightened horse. Now they hung useless at his sides. Because I was afraid you'd stop. Evelyn's face changed, only slightly. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the small brass key to the Price barn. Jacob had been using it while they traced the water line. She placed it on the fence post beside him. Then she took the pouch. I need to go. He did not ask her to stay. That hurt too. At home, Evelyn set the leather pouch on the kitchen table and lit the lamp. She opened it once. Inside were folded papers. Daniel's cramped handwriting, faded county marks. Then she closed it again. From the drawer beside her bed, she brought out the letters tied with cotton thread. One by one, she unfolded them. She read the first line of each, then folded them back. She did not tear a single page. Across Willow Fork, Jacob sat alone at his cabin table. The empty pie dish still rested on the shelf where Evelyn had left it. 2 days passed. On the 3rd afternoon, Calvin Boone rode into the Price yard. He carried a folded deed inside his coat. Winter's coming, he said. Creek's getting worse. I can take this place off your hands before you lose stock. Evelyn did not invite him inside. My land isn't for sale. Boone smiled without warmth. Might be easier to say that while there's still water on it. He held out the deed. Evelyn closed the door. The next morning, she woke before dawn to the sound of cattle shifting restlessly near the trough. She pulled on her boots and went outside. The trough was almost dry. Willow Fork had dropped to a thin ribbon between stones. Evelyn crouched and touched the mud. Someone had changed the diversion gate during the night. Behind her, the house stood quiet. Across the creek, beyond the pale fields, Jacob Whitmore's chimney sent one narrow line of smoke into the cold morning sky. Evelyn turned away from it. She did not ride to him. Instead, she followed Willow Fork north with a shovel strapped beside her saddle and Daniel's ledger wrapped in oilcloth beneath her coat. Frost cracked under the mare's hooves. At the diversion gate, fresh mud showed where someone had shifted the timber boards during the night. Evelyn crouched beside them. Boot prints, 2 horses. No names written in the dirt. She marked the position in her notebook, then rode to Cottonwood Crossing. Henry Walsh was already at the county office, warming his hands over a small iron stove. He examined Daniel's papers through wire-rimmed spectacles. "The copy's real enough," he said, "but this seal won't carry much weight if Boone contests it. Too faded." Evelyn's mouth tightened. There has to be another. Henry turned another page. Evelyn opened Daniel's ledger and searched the older entries herself. 6 years back, beneath a hay payment and a note about fence wire, she found 5 words: "Original lodged with field survey, North Ridge cabin." She read them twice. Henry leaned closer. "Shh. County survey crew used a cabin up there before records were moved into town. Still standing? Maybe." Outside, clouds had begun gathering over the bighorns. Snow clouds. Evelyn left the office, found a freight driver heading south, and paid him 2 bits to carry a written message to Deputy Amos Keller. Then she bought coffee, dried beans, lamp oil, and 2 wool blankets from Martha Bell. Only after that did she cross Willow Fork. Jacob opened his cabin door before she knocked twice. He looked tired. A half-packed bedroll lay near the wall. Evelyn noticed it. She said nothing. Instead, she spread the survey map across his table. "I found where the original field book may be." Jacob studied the line she pointed to. "North Ridge. You know the old cabin?" "I do." "Snow comes tonight." His eyes lifted to hers. Evelyn kept her voice level. "I'm not asking you to fix this for me. I'm asking you to show me the trail." Jacob folded the map once. "I'll saddle the horses." Nothing more. No bargain. No question about forgiveness. They left before noon. The climb grew steeper past the last cottonwoods. Wind moved through the pine in long, low breaths. On narrow stretches, Jacob rode behind Evelyn instead of taking the lead. When she chose the wrong fork once, he only said, "Left side holds better ground." She corrected without embarrassment. Later, a rotted board tore loose from an abandoned cattle shed and swung hard in the wind. Jacob stepped between it and Evelyn, caught the timber against his shoulder, and held it until she led the horses past. He never looked at her as if he expected thanks. An hour later, his own horse lost footing on a patch of ice. The animal lurched sideways. Jacob dropped from the saddle and slid toward the edge of loose rock. Evelyn had the rope free before he called her name. She looped it around a pine trunk and braced both boots against the frozen ground. "Take it!" Jacob caught the line. By the time he climbed back onto solid earth, his coat was streaked with snow and dirt. He sat there, breathing hard. Evelyn gathered the rope. "Seems you're not the only one who gets to keep somebody from falling." A faint smile touched his face. "No, ma'am." They reached a line shelter before dark. The storm arrived after sunset. Wind pushed snow through the cracks in the boards. Jacob laid his blanket near the door and gave Evelyn the place closest to the small stove. She watched him settle against the wall. "You were packing." Jacob looked at the fire. "Yes." "Leaving Cottonwood Crossing?" "If that's what you want." Evelyn's expression hardened slightly. "That's not what I asked." He nodded. "No. I was leaving because I've made enough choices for you already." The stove clicked as the metal cooled. "If you don't want me in your life," he said, "I won't make staying into another burden you have to carry." Evelyn reached into her coat and touched one of his old letters. She almost unfolded it, then stopped. The paper stayed closed in her hand. She no longer wanted to know what J.W. would write. She wanted to see what Jacob Whitmore would do. By morning, the storm had thinned. They found the old survey cabin under 6 inches of snow. Inside, beneath a broken cot and 2 warped map tubes, Evelyn discovered a wooden record box. The field book was still there. Henry Walsh's handwriting from years earlier filled several pages. Willow Fork, Price parcel, Whitmore parcel, shared use. Evelyn closed the book against her chest. Then a horse snorted outside. Jacob moved toward the door. Calvin Boone stood on the trail with 2 ranch hands behind him. "That book belongs with county records. Boone said. It will be there soon, Evelyn answered. Boone's eyes shifted to Jacob. Unless your friend decides to make trouble. One of the ranch hands stepped down. He walked straight toward Jacob. Jacob did not move. The man shoved him once. Nothing. Then struck him across the mouth. Jacob's head turned. Evelyn saw the old story waiting to happen. Big Jacob, violent drifter, dangerous man. Boone was counting on it. Jacob looked back at the ranch hand. Then, when the man rushed him again, Jacob caught his wrist, turned him, and forced him down into the snow. No punch, no rage, just control. Stay down, Jacob said quietly. The second man moved toward Evelyn. She drew the revolver from beneath her coat. The barrel stayed low. That's far enough, he stopped. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then hoofbeats echoed from below the ridge. Amos Keller appeared first. Henry Walsh rode behind him. Evelyn let out the breath she had been holding. Boone looked from them to the field book. His face changed. You planned this. Evelyn lowered the revolver. I planned not to be alone. Later, inside the survey cabin, Henry examined the book page by page. The water rights are clear, he said. Price and Whitmore both have protected use. Amos wrote Boone's interference into his notebook. Jacob stood by the door with a split lip, saying almost nothing. He had been given every excuse to become the man Cottonwood Crossing believed him to be. He had refused. Henry reached for Daniel's old leather pouch one more time. His fingers pressed along the inner seam. Something crackled. He frowned. Then he worked a thin folded paper from beneath the stitching. The paper was yellow with age. On the outside, in Daniel Price's handwriting, were two words, for Evelyn. Henry handed her the folded paper. For a moment, she could not open it. Snow whispered against the survey cabin walls. Amos stood near the door with his notebook tucked inside his coat. Jacob kept his distance, one hand resting on the back of a chair, his split lip dark against the cold. Evelyn broke the fold. Daniel's handwriting leaned harder to the right than she remembered. He had written only a few lines. Not about Jacob, not about Boone, about her. If she ever read this, he wrote, he hoped she would not mistake remembering him for being required to stop living. He reminded her that the freight stop had been her idea before they married, drawn in the margins of old ledgers while he teased her for planning 3 years ahead. Evelyn read that line twice, then lowered the paper. Beyond the window, Willow Fork disappeared beneath white ground. For nearly 3 years, she had told herself she was protecting what Daniel left behind. The house, the cattle, the land. Standing there, she understood she had protected something else too. The moment before loss. She had built her life around never being surprised by happiness again. Evelyn folded Daniel's note carefully. Jacob did not ask what it said. That mattered. By the time they returned to Cottonwood Crossing, Henry had enough in the field book to force the diversion gate restored, while the county reviewed Boone's claim. Amos entered the interference in his record, along with what happened on North Ridge. At Martha Bell's store, word traveled quickly. Big Jacob Whitmore had been struck first. Big Jacob Whitmore had not beaten anyone senseless. He had held one man down and stopped there. The story changed because, for once, the truth had witnesses. Jacob still did not come to Price homestead. 3 days passed. Then Evelyn saw him from her kitchen window. Across Willow Fork, he was taking tools down from the barn wall. A saddle blanket lay folded over the rail. His bedroll was tied behind the saddle. Evelyn stood there with Daniel's note in one hand and said nothing. The next morning, before Jacob could ride out, someone knocked on his cabin door. He opened it. Evelyn stood on the porch holding the empty pie dish. Jacob looked at the dish first, then at her. You came for that? I did. He took it from the shelf and placed it in her hands. Evelyn held it. Neither moved. Jacob glanced toward his horse. You leaving today? She asked. Was planning to. Why? His eyes came back to hers. I told you. I won't make staying into something you have to carry. Evelyn looked at the bedroll. You always leave before people decide for themselves? Jacob's jaw shifted. Sometimes. That seems convenient. He almost smiled. Almost. Evelyn stepped closer. Are you planning to spend the rest of your life riding off before anyone gets the chance to ask you to stay? Jacob said nothing. Then he walked to the saddle, untied the bedroll, set it on the porch. He did not touch her, did not ask if that was enough. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. If you stay, she said, you stay as Jacob Whitmore, not J.W., not the man who decides which truth is too hard for me. I understand. No, you agree or you don't. Jacob nodded once. I agree. Evelyn handed him the pie dish again. He frowned. I thought you came to take it back. I did. She stepped onto the porch. Now I'm bringing it back. A little color came into his face. Why? Because next week I'm putting up 2 more stalls at Price Homestead. Jacob waited. If you finish your own ranch work first, she said, you can help. That was all. It was enough. Winter settled hard over Cottonwood Crossing. They rebuilt the diversion ditch before the ground froze solid. Evelyn signed her first agreement with 2 freight operators in January. The name written across the page was Price Way Station. Jacob never suggested changing it. He measured beams from her drawings. She corrected him twice. He corrected her once. Neither minded. Some evenings, when Jacob worked late, Evelyn left a lamp burning in the front window. The first time he noticed, he stood outside longer than necessary. By February, 2 new stalls stood beside the barn. By March, wagon traffic began using the yard. Spring came slowly. Snow pulled back from the sagebrush. Willow Fork broke free under thin ice and started running clear between both properties. One evening, Jacob entered Evelyn's kitchen carrying a broken harness buckle. She sat at the table with a blank sheet of paper in front of her. He nodded toward it. Writing a letter? Evelyn looked at him, then folded the empty page in half. Not tonight. She stood and went to the stove. A fresh apple cinnamon pie rested beside 2 plates. Jacob set the harness buckle down. Outside, water moved through Willow Fork toward Price Way Station. Inside, Evelyn cut the first slice. This time, she did not carry it across the meadow to a stranger. And Jacob Whitmore was no longer a man preparing to disappear before dawn. Maybe that was what staying had meant all along. Not forgetting the people who were gone. Not pretending old wounds had never happened. And not asking another person to carry the weight of what you were too afraid to say. Evelyn kept Daniel's memory without making it the boundary of her future. Jacob learned that protecting someone did not mean choosing for them, and that strength was not always measured by what a man could lift, endure, or fight. Sometimes it was measured by whether he could tell the truth, accept another person's answer, and remain when running would have been easier. Out there beneath the Bighorn Mountains, 2 people who had first trusted each other through ink and distance finally learned something harder: how to trust each other face to face. Perhaps some of us know a little about that. Maybe there is a door we've kept closed because of what happened before. Maybe there is a truth we've delayed because we're afraid honesty will cost us someone we love. Or maybe, like Jacob, we've spent so long preparing to leave that we've forgotten there might be someone willing to ask us to stay. The past deserves to be remembered. It does not always deserve the final word. What would you have done in Evelyn's place? Could you have trusted Jacob again? If stories about second chances, quiet courage, and unexpected love in the American West mean something to you, subscribe and stay with us. There are more trails ahead, and more stories of mystery, heartbreak, and healing waiting just beyond the next ridge.